Okay, back in action. So we're talking about the sustainable travel mindset. The first point that I was making is that sustainable travel goes beyond ecotourism. Ecotourism really focuses on nature and the natural environment, whereas the lens of sustainable travel is wider. It focuses on the economy and people as well. The second thing I wanted to share is that sustainable travel has a collective view rather than individualistic. It recognizes that our decisions impact communities and should not be acting out of just our individual interests. It talks about really taking responsibility for your impact and having I guess, like more sense of responsibility for what you're doing, not just caring about yourself. Another thing that I've already mentioned now is just taking responsibility for your impact. When we travel without an awareness of the impact of our travel, we're not necessarily going to make decisions that could have a positive benefit for the community. We also could perhaps be unaware of the historical implications that are exist in a country or just the privilege that we have. So I think a sustainable traveler is more aware and strives to be. And the last thing, a really easy way to understand what sustainable travel is that it's good for people, place, and planet. And we just love that. It makes it very easy to remember.
So, some thoughts that we have. When we think about sustainable travel mindset, we want to always be aware of our privilege. So, our privilege as Americans, or our privilege as having a standard of living that allows us to do certain things that perhaps the locals may not be able to. We think about the locals as being the experts. So I mentioned earlier when I was traveling with my prior company and I would go into a remote area of Vietnam, I didn't know what was going on at first, but they were able to show me what things to eat and to drink and where to go. And it was really a much more rich experience by allowing their expertise to guide what I did. We, as sustainable travelers, have an open mind and realize when we are operating from a Western viewpoint. So we don't like to go into an area and assume that things should be one way, or if they're not the way that we want them to be, that they're wrong. That is not a sustainable traveler. We, in all of our choices, want to ensure that we are doing no harm to the local community. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in the planet and the people slides to come. But that's a very big consideration for me in really everything that I do when I'm traveling. And the last thing is a question. What can I do to learn more about a place? So we're thinking, what books can we read? Are there any documentaries? Is there anything on Netflix that can prepare us to learn a little bit more about the history, the culture, the art, things that are not going to be found at that really big tourist destination? And then we want to have meaningful conversations with locals while we're on the ground. Those are the things that really make our travel more enjoyable, and then also help us to leave a positive impact on the place.
We hope that this structure of like thoughts can help make it concrete for you as you're already perhaps a sustainable traveler or trying to do even better. You can take some of these into your thought process.
Yeah.
Now we're going to talk about some actions and some recommendations that you can take. And we've broken it up by the different categories of sustainable travel. So the first one is good for people. And these are some photos of wonderful locals. I'll share some stories about them along the way here. So the first thing is we really recommend engaging in community-based tourism experiences that preserve the local culture. When people are able to learn a living through teaching their traditions, you help to reinforce that culture. And I think it's really beneficial for the people. They also can stay in their community and earn a living. And I think that's a beautiful thing. The next thing that we highly recommend is engaging in agritourism and supporting farmers. Farmers around the world are really challenged by climate change, and it can be difficult to make money from the crops that they have historically harvested and grown. So, agritourism is a great opportunity for many of them to diversify their income streams and continue to share their knowledge. So, we have seen that in every experience that we've done agritourism, we've learned so much. We also love that it's really connected to the land. So on the left, we had an experience in Brazil on Cotijuba Island where we visited the gardens that were productive gardens at people's homes. And those were kind of like small farms. They would grow some things and sell them to their neighbors and their local community. And so we learned about local life through that visit. Then the picture on the right is Finca Boiti from Puerto Rico. And Jordan, the man in the picture, is a chef as well as a farmer. And so he did an experience for our group that consisted of a lunch with food that he had grown right there on his farm. And he told us his whole story and his perspective as a Puerto Rican on the history. So I think you have that opportunity to really connect in so many ways to people's stories, to the land, and to the food, which is always great. Be mindful of objectifying people. This is really important. Such a simple thing, but there are some cases where it is exploitative to take a picture of a local person. So being more mindful of asking before taking photos of a local, depending on the context. I'm sure you all can think of situations where maybe it is better to ask if you're not just in a public place. So being really mindful of that. Engaging in equitable cultural exchange with locals. This is really important because if locals are up for talking with you and sharing with you, that's great, but it's not their job necessarily to educate you about the destination that you are visiting. And so you want to make sure that the exchanges that you're having are equitable. And I also think that it's great when you're able to have conversations with people outside of the service context. So people who are not in working in a hotel or in a restaurant or serving you directly, getting outside of that context so that you are interacting and sharing with somebody that is not being paid to do so is a really different kind of experience. And the last point here is bargaining from a place of empathy rather than privilege. I really like the way Remi described it to me that when you go to a bazaar or market, for example, a lot of people are used to haggling and trying to get the best price. And sometimes, without realizing it, you could cause the person to make a sale at a price that really doesn't support their livelihood. So, if you have that privilege, if the money doesn't really matter that much for you and you're more about the high of bargaining, maybe stop yourself and be willing to pay a little bit of a higher price than you may have in the past so that you can support the local person and what they're doing.
Yeah, especially now, there's a lot less tourism happening, so people are inclined to make a sale so that they can support their family. If it's not going to break your bank, I challenge you to consider paying a little bit more.
Mhm.
So good for place. We have a couple questions here that we ask when either coordinating trips for ExplorEquity or when we're traveling on our own. We always tend towards locally owned businesses, and we prefer to stay at locally owned or boutique hotels or Airbnbs. rather than chains. The reason for that is a concept called tourism leakage, where if you stay at one of the major resorts, that's generally not owned by a local. They generally have a lot of tax incentives to be there, and they're not then paying property taxes. The revenues are immediately leaving the country. So we do what we can to support the place with our dollars. So as much as possible, we spend our money with locally owned businesses. We purchase locally made products instead of imported products. A lot of times people are used to a certain brand of food or of electronics, so they become loyal to it. It's not sustainable for so many reasons, but it also, for the place, is very bad because the local producers of those products are the ones who are harmed. So another thing that we like to do is visit places that are not experiencing over tourism. So instead of going to the the Taj Mahal, we might go to uh, Jaipur, the Pink Palace, and we would give some income or some revenue to local shopkeepers there. And then the last one is easy to do uh, if your job allows it, to visit destinations off peak times of year. So flip flopping the hemispheres or just going to a place at a time where they otherwise wouldn't be generating revenue is helpful for that place.
We recognize that some of these suggestions are not possible to implement right now if you're not traveling, but we hope that you can keep them in mind for the future as you plan your return to whatever your normal travel schedule is.
And I'd like to ask in the chat if there's anything that you would add for ways that you can or have done things that are good for the place.
Yes, for any of these slides, if you have additional suggestions, because we recognize that there are people in this call who already are practicing sustainable travel and we're not covering everything. So it would be great to have your knowledge and expertise shared in the chat as well. So the next thing we're going to focus on is good for planet. And this is just a starter list because there's so much more that you can do. But definitely a very basic and impactful thing to do is to bring a reusable water bottle. If the water is safe to drink for you in the destination, you can refill it. You can also purchase water bottles with filters built in and have a bottle that you can use in any type of situation. We also highly recommend to bring reusable bags with you to minimize the use of plastic. There are all the different kinds of models. We love to have some that fold up completely and then you can throw into a fanny pack or a backpack and don't take up a lot of space. Avoid exploitative experiences with wild animals. I think awareness about this is growing significantly. There are many people that are focused on getting a certain photo with an animal, but they perhaps don't fully realize that these experiences are harmful and that wild animals should not be treated that way. So do your research and don't just go for the Instagram worthy shot. Consume locally sourced foods and beverages. So we mentioned this a little bit on the last slide, but it's definitely better for the planet to not consume imported goods because they don't have to be shipped in and incur all the miles and the carbon footprint that it takes to bring that in. So this is something that's really fun to do with beer because everywhere you go, there's always a local beer or multiple local beers, and you find out from the locals which beer is their preference, and then someone else disagrees with them. There's always a really fun debate around beer. A fish is another one that's great. Find out which fish is local. I find that people don't ask a lot of questions about fish. This is just my view, but this is something that could be great to explore as well. And of course, fruits and vegetables, there's so much diversity in local products, and you might not find that in the tourist aimed restaurants. They might be producing food that is more of like an international palette. So it can be a fun adventure to look for places that are really going to show you the local foods and the local menu. And the last tip here is just take public transportation when possible. This is always good for the planet.
The two things that I will add, the local consumption of food and beverages just tastes better as well.
Mhm.
So I recommend it. If for nothing else, it's a better experience that way. And then public transportation, when I was in New York, it was a colorful experience every time. Same while traveling. So
True, good people watching.
yeah. All right. Do you want to talk about this dinner or no?
Ah, sure. Okay, so the food here is from a farm to table dinner experience in Puerto Rico in a town called Calle, where we had a dinner that focused on the food, telling the history of Puerto Rico through a food menu to showcase the indigenous influences, the African and the Spanish. So I think that that was just one of the most memorable meal experiences that we had, because we heard from three different local experts: the chef who presented each dish, the historian who told the story and made those big picture connections for us, and then also the women who owned the culinary food. What does she call it? Culinary
Culinary
food
Farm
lodge.
Lodge?
Yeah, it's like an eco lodge, a place where you can stay. And she had the productive garden as well. So I think that there's sometimes this perception, unfortunately, that local food is not high end or gourmet. And this was a very high end experience using local products with a local chef. So I think that when people have that bias, they're really cutting themselves off from amazing experiences.
Yeah, you're missing out. All right. So here are some of our key sustainable travel learnings. We want you all to realize that it's a journey. It takes time, and just strive for progress every day. Don't try to be perfect, because you never will be. If you take just one step in the right direction every day, at the end of the year, you're 365% better. Be open to feedback. You don't know it all. We don't know it all. There are experts who can correct us. And if we're open to it, then we grow as people. Decolonization is a huge topic. Uh, we'll have our Instagram handle on the last slide, so I'd like you to follow along with that conversation. But there's so much to unpack there. Uh, I can't even touch it right here.
Mhm.
No person can do it all. Everyone has to play a part. So it's that collective view. It's not individualistic. And the stakes are high. If we don't travel sustainably, the communities will not be there. They will not be the same over time. Our impact with plastic, with expecting things to be one way and having them change to that, really makes irreparable harm. So communities around the world are counting on us.
One thing we just wanted to mention is about how ExplorEquity as a company has shifted in response to the pandemic. One of the things that we are very focused on doing is supporting communities now. So we have started an online store that will feature products that benefit local communities and come from places around the world. It also will host virtual experiences. So just to give you an idea of the products that we have right now, this is a cookbook that's called Travel to Brazil. It has stories and recipes from across the country, and it really highlights cooks who are the experts in their communities. So this is a really beautiful book with so much to share. We also have a cooking class with Chef Natalia here. She's based in Mexico City. And Remi and I did this class in person. She gave us colorful aprons and we joined her in her home kitchen. And now we're so excited to support her as she has shifted everything to virtual learning. She's also really great for corporate groups for team building activities. And so we learned to make, in this class, 3 different types of salsas. And it was so cool because she did different preparations that we were not familiar with, like smoking things and just putting them in the fire on her stove. And it was really, really exciting. The last experience or product that we have right now is a game called Paths Crossing. This is a conversation game. So it's really fun to play with friends. It's about sustainable travel. So it has questions that spark conversations and help you to articulate and commit to sustainable travel and think about things that maybe you haven't thought about before. So that's something that we're also featuring. In the future, we'll be growing this platform and we are looking for partnerships and other products and experiences to feature. So thank you for spending this time with us today. We're looking forward to staying connected with you. We're on Instagram as ExplorEquity, 1E in the middle. And we also have Facebook, there's our email address, and we have a link to sign up for our newsletter. So we hope all of you have learned something, that you will commit even more deeply to sustainable travel, and we're looking forward to the Q&A.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. Oh my gosh, you are so inspirational. And I'm sure, I know I am, I'm sure everyone else on the call is just ready to get out there and start being a sustainable traveler. So thank you for sharing all of your insight and tips. We do have a lot of great questions. So for anyone else that has a question, feel free to drop it in the chat and I will get that answered for you. So the first one we have is from Danny. They're asking if you can recommend a platform for finding community-based tourism events. And the only one that comes to mind for them is, the experiences sections of Airbnb. So do you have any thoughts on that?
For experiences, I think it depends on what you are looking for. This is something that I think we have some knowledge of, but we're not going to be able to perhaps give exactly what you want. I feel like VAWOW is a good one. So that's Vacation with an Artist. They've shifted to digital experiences. And I believe it's VAWAA is the way that it's spelled. That one is cool in terms of someone who might be interested in the arts and really learning from a local in that genre. Airbnb is a platform that you can find a lot of providers and connect directly with them. I think that one thing about Airbnb is that there are some providers who would get more earnings if you did book with them independently. So I would encourage Instagram also, because there's a lot of providers and people that are showing what they do on Instagram. It's perhaps a little bit harder to find, but I think that's one way to start. And I wish that I had a little bit more to offer there.
I agree with you. Instagram is great. Also, if you're able to find a sustainable tour operator in a country that has experiences that go throughout the country, then you can find those generally on Instagram or a Google search. They're able to tell you things that might be of interest to you.
Yeah, I think if you're talking about in person, then that's one of the benefits of really connecting with sustainable travel operators. So we have partners in Brazil, in Honduras, in Puerto Rico, so we can make connections for any traveler in those areas. And we also are forming some other partnerships. So if you're looking for in person, then it's a little bit of a different slant depending on your destination. And I also want to just highlight Justa, who's on this call. If you are interested in Tanzania, she has a really great brand.
Great, that's perfect. And that's just another good reminder to, I dropped your info in the chat box, but to connect with you also in case if anyone is planning to go to those locations, or if you just have tips or questions that don't get answered on this call, you can reach out to both of them that way as well. So let's see, Danny had another question. If you have any recommendations for starting up genuine conversations with locals, how do you go about doing that?
I'll take that one.
Okay.
Beer helps. No, it does help. But really, just coming from a place of humility, if you learn a few words in the local language, that goes incredibly far. So every place that I have traveled, I learned how to say hello, bathroom, and beer. And they really like that. And then they say, oh, your whatever language is so good. How did you learn it? And I say, well, thank you. You don't have to lie. But then we start talking, and I ask about restaurants that they recommend, what their favorite dish is. And oftentimes that leads to a 10-15 minute conversation.
I'll add to that one thing that I have enjoyed is I love research. So I'm always researching ahead of time, and I look for events that are happening locally. So when we went to Mexico City, I went to a festival that was being held in a community garden because I have experience with community gardens and food justice. That was very interesting to me. And they had they gave me a tour of the garden. I was able to meet some people. They had some food vendors. So it was something that was happening locally, but I made a point to seek it out and show up. And so I think something like that, based around your interests, if you can do some research, that will put you in contact with locals where it will be more natural to strike up a conversation. Another thing that I love to do is salsa dance. So around the world, I'm always looking ahead of time for where's the salsa happening. I look on Facebook events. That's one way that I look for. And I also have connections with some salsa dancers, and I'll try to put out feelers and say, hey, I'm traveling here. Does anybody have any connections? So that has been really fun. So I've traveled and I salsa dance in Seoul in South Korea and met people there. And so that way it's very authentic. And that would be my suggestion.
Those are great tips. I think you're right. It's so important finding what you're interested in, because then that natural personality and authenticity will come across and shine through with those people you're meeting. So I love that. I love that you salsa dance. Remi, I have to ask, do you salsa dance as well?
We went salsa dancing in Hong Kong, but it's not my forte at the moment. I'm working on it.
But he will.
You'll get him too. At the next destination you're off to. And then Remi, I love your tip about the beer. I think that is so true. I think if you can, you just find that common ground, whether it's food or drink, and that just puts people more at natural ease. So love those tips. All right, so moving on. So Anukrati, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly, was asking if you can just explain decolonization just in a quick brief. I know you said we could go to your Instagram page and learn more about that, but if you could just give a quick overview of what that is, that would be wonderful.
Okay, so I will do the best that my brain can do right now. Decolonization is the process of removing the impact of colonization on your thoughts, your beliefs, your behaviors, because we have all been impacted by the legacy of colonization in our lives. And I'll give an example that relates to me. Because I'm Cuban and Puerto Rican, my grandmothers had methods for healing, for cooking, that now I don't know. So my personal process of decolonization could be reconnecting to my roots, to the things that perhaps when they were colonized by the Spanish, that indigenous knowledge was lost, or as we immigrated to the States, that we became more Americanized and now no longer had enough reverence or value placed on what we came in with, our traditional recipes, our healing methods, even just aspects of our culture like language, as you find many people who are Latinx who do not know Spanish anymore. And so everyone's process of decolonization will be personal. For example, someone who is indigenous but has not been part of their culture, their process might be reconnecting and learning practices and celebrations and things they just are not part of in terms of their culture. If you are a person that might be like, oh, I don't have a culture, I'm just white, then maybe your process is about undoing the harmful biases that you might have as far as prejudice towards other groups or traditions, and just figuring out how to be an ally and change internal messaging you might have that would be unconscious, like it's really buried inside of you. So we do have some more dialogue about that on our Instagram, and we're sharing posts from a lot of people who approach decolonization from many different identities and frameworks. So hopefully that can be helpful.
That was so well said. Thank you. You explained that beautifully, I think. And yes, just another reminder, go check them out on their Instagram page. I love that you have other people contributing as well to that, because I think it's great to just hear from, there's going to be so many different perspectives, as you mentioned on that. So another question, do you think learning the basic words before visiting a destination could be categorized as sustainable travel?
I do. Sustainable travel is a very broad concept. So yes, it allows me to have a more deep conversation, a deep relationship with the person that I otherwise wouldn't. Yes, it's also somewhat artificial, but by taking that effort, it shows that I do care and I'm not coming at it from a if you don't do it my way, you're wrong perspective.
I think that
Yeah, I mean, just as much as you can learn about local language and also cultural practices. Like, for example, how people greet each other, what's polite, what's not. I think those are important things as well.
Sure.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's just taking those first small steps. That's, the key to getting you out there to doing more of that. But that's one small way that you can do it. Okay, so you had asked the question about some tips of how to travel sustainably for people in the chat. I don't know if you saw those, but I'll just bring up a couple of them in case you want to talk through any of them or just hear what everyone said. But some people recommended checking Meetup for local activities and get together. So kind of, as you mentioned, great to research to find where your interests are. So I think that's a wonderful way. I'll just kind of run through them. And then if you have any to add, you can. Marta recommended, looking at the local restaurants that, are the locals are at versus maybe the chains. And so that's a great way to kind of give back to those local associations. Let's see, Brianne recommended with locals and tours by locals. So I think that's another great thing to make sure you're taking your tours with the local companies. And then do not engage in jingoism. That was another one. So I don't know if any of those resonate with you, if you have any more to add, Catarina or Remi.
I don't have another to add, but I love the walking tour the tour recommendation. We love to do walking tours wherever we go if we can as the first part of our trip, because they'll point out different areas, they'll talk about restaurants, they'll talk about history, but hit on a lot of different points that we otherwise wouldn't have.
Yeah, I've always, go ahead.
No, I was just saying these are all like great suggestions. And I hope that everyone is feeling like it's possible and they have immediately next steps. So I would love to see in the chat, like, what's one thing that you have as a takeaway that you're definitely going to be trying out in terms of sustainable travel? Because I think that would be great to hear and share with the rest of the attendees, just what your takeaways are, what you're going to be doing moving forward, because I think everyone's going to have a different approach. So yeah.
Perfect. Great suggestion. Yeah. So everyone drop that in the chat, what your number one takeaway is from today. And then I had a question for you. So you had mentioned you tend to read a lot of books before you travel. Are there any that you really recommend that might be interesting for us?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the destination. I will say that for Puerto Rico, we read two fantastic books. One was called Battle for Paradise by Naomi Klein. And this book wasn't that long. It was so timely because it talked about what happened immediately after Hurricane Maria. How did people come in from external places and come in an opportunistic way to take advantage of Puerto Rico in the midst of that disaster, like disaster capitalism? That was so illuminating. We also read another book called, now I'm going to forget it.
War Against All Puerto Ricans?
Yes, thank you. War Against All Puerto Ricans, which gave the history of the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States, which I, as a half Puerto Rican, did not know. So it just changed my whole perspective and really prepared me, because I felt like I traveled just to see my family over the years, but I did not know about the history and the struggle for independence that has existed over the decades. So I think that depending on where you're going, looking for books that are written by locals, that are not going to take a capitalistic, like colonizing perspective, trying to look for ones that are more critical and provide a different viewpoint are really important. Overall, in terms of decolonization, reading is another great way to decolonize. So we call it like decolonize your bookshelf. And there's a lot of blog posts about it. We have a post on our Instagram, but just looking at who are the authors that write the books that you read, you know, who gets published? Because there are a lot of authors that are just not getting the platform, but they have wonderful books, and we need to be also supporting them and considering who we're reading, because that feeds our minds as well.
I love that. That's one of my favorite tips today. So when we were on a trip in Cambodia, I really didn't know, to be honest, I just didn't know much about what had gone on in the past. And I did get a book from a local, which explained the history. And it made me think, you know what, I really need to make sure I do this before I travel every time, because it just, it you know, puts you in that culture and in that country, and just gives you a little bit more compassion of what they went through with any situation. So I love that you brought that up, because that was really meaningful to me when I experienced that. So I think, as you mentioned, it's just these small things that you can do ahead of time before you go. And then once you're there are so many other tips that you can do to interact this way with others. So I love that. I think we are just about done. I think I have answered everyone's questions. If anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Otherwise, as I mentioned, you can connect with Catarina and Remi, and I dropped their Instagram, Facebook, their website, and then there's also a link to sign up for their newsletter for all their great tips and to check out what's coming up in their world. So Catarina and Remi, before I turn it over to let everyone know about some things that are coming up with the Nomadic Network, do you have anything last to share with us?
No, I think we're good. We really thank everyone for spending this time with us, and we hope that we've shared some things that have been helpful. So we're so excited to have had this conversation.
Thank you.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much. I think it's so timely. I know so many of us are itching to get back out on the road. And so now this is a great way for us to think about how we can travel differently moving forward. So thank you so much for sharing all of your beautiful information with us today. And I am going to share my screen one last time and talk to you guys a little bit more about some things that are coming up with the Nomadic Network. Let's see, it's There we go. Okay. So I mentioned earlier, we do have this exclusive community called the Patreon. There's the link right there. So for example, if you missed part of this event today, or if you missed some other events, you can get the event replays, which is wonderful to go back and hear all of the stories you might have missed, and just tons of other great perks. So for just a few dollars a month, you have access to all these wonderful things. So check that out. And then, as I mentioned, we have tons of events. I think we have them scheduled all the way out through July. So we have 3 different types. So we have these travel presentation style events. So next week, we have on the 29th, Off the Tourist Trail, finding experiences that maximize benefit to local nonprofits. So that will be wonderful. Take Flight organization that Nomadic Matt is part of. They will be speaking a little bit about that as well. And then on the 30th, we have Steve Brock coming to talk to us about hidden travel and how to get more out of any trip that you might take. And then on the 31st, we have Gabby to talk to us about how to work remotely. And she is a phenomenal speaker. She has so many great tips. So definitely make sure you come to one of those events. And then, as I mentioned, we have these regional happy hours. So these are a little bit different, where they're more informal. Everyone's unmuted. It's just a great way to connect with those in your own community. So tonight we have one in Texas. So if you are in the Texas area, or if you just want to come join, feel free to register for that. And then look at the calendar, because we have them scheduled, as I mentioned, all the way out through June or July. We tend to have them monthly in the region, but they're happening pretty much every day. So very fun, just a different great way to connect with other people in this community. And then we have these monthly book clubs. So unfortunately, the one for April had to be postponed, but you have lots of time to start reading the book for our May book club. And that is with Rolf Potts on Marco Polo Didn't Go There, a fabulous book. And this is great. It's just, again, a very informal discussion where we bring the author to share their insights about the books, and you can ask your questions directly to the author. So it's a really fun way, and just a different thing we've been doing. So hopefully you can come and join us for one of those. And that's it. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Catarina and Remi, for sharing your beautiful insight into how to be a sustainable traveler and to shift our mindset. I know I have picked up some wonderful tips. So I love hearing from you. We couldn't do this without you. And to all of you on the call, thank you so much for your great questions and for being so engaged. Love having you here, and love having you from all over the world. I can't believe where everyone is calling in from. This is such a beautiful group. So thank you all. And hopefully we will see you soon at another TNN event. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. Bye. Enjoy wherever you are in the world. And Catarina and Remi, thank you so much. I'm so excited to check out your site and the different places that you have these tours going to. So I'm excited for your next adventures as well. All right, goodbye, everyone. Oh, and if anyone needed to save the chat, you can just click those 3 dots. I'm going to do that because I always forget. Sometimes there's some great tips there. And